on this computer. Sweet. Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're super excited to host our bi-weekly Q&As. Today we have Jason and Jonathan, both co-founders of Omni, a demand gen agency that aims to build pipeline and revenue for B2B SaaS companies. I will let you guys take it away. Thanks for coming.
You said it well, my friend. You said it well.
Appreciate it.
Well, sweet. Well, at least we know all each other. Scott, I know I've seen you a bunch on LinkedIn. So we're all just the LinkedIn peeps hanging out, which is cool. And everyone else, which is always nice. But let me try not to do too much of a monologue between some slides and stuff. And I guess we can pause on some things, but let me share this screen here and then we can dive in a bit. I guess we made some intro. So Jason, maybe we just kind of dive in, I guess, and just kind of get into the meat of it, right?
100%.
Well, yeah, I guess you guys kind of saw the headline, right? Obviously, and let me put this in a little bigger here so you can see it all. Boom, there you go. Everyone can see that all right?
Mhm.
Yes, shaking heads, cool.
All good.
Yeah, so anyways, you guys saw the headline, obviously, and we've had some cool successes with a couple of B2B SaaS companies and hopefully a lot more. And this is one of them that I thought was actually worth sharing and diving into a handful of the details that Jason and I have been close with. This has been a long-time client of ours. And so it's cool to, always see us have a part of the success of this. And clearly with everything, I think as you see those posts on LinkedIn where this one ad led to $500,000 of revenue, this is not that. And, paid ads is a piece of the puzzle, right? You've just got all sorts of other things that go along to make this all successful. But I think certainly the strategy that we put in place, I think did that. So we can kind of jump into it. And then I'm seeing, I guess, Brian's face. That's good. But if there's some comments and stuff, then we can pause and whatnot. But I wanted to give some context before we kind of jump into it. And Jason, add anything, whenever you want to jump in, but some context just so everyone kind of can relate this type of SaaS brand with maybe the company they're at today or going to be working for, just to have some level of awareness of what the context is here. So you guys can read this pretty easily, but I mean, titles predominantly marketing people, demand gen marketers, really marketing of any kind. There's some other titles that were in there, but we just didn't add them in just to keep it easy. Geos were US, UK, and then they did a mid-market to enterprise split, which we'll kind of talk about later, but it's 50 to 1,000 and 1,000 plus, which I don't believe there's a cap on that. And then industries really span the gamut, but most of the budget is predominantly spent on SaaS tech-based companies. There are some other industries that are tertiary in there, but those are kind of their core ICP of what they're going after. And then ACV on the other side, around 15K. So it's not a transactional sale. They're sales led, 3 months on average. Enterprise is a little bit closer to 9 months, I believe. And then they just ran their Series B, I believe, late last year, I think it was, when they raised it. And the ad budget, I believe now is around 45. It wasn't like that when we first started with them. So we've kind of scaled it up closer to 45. So we can kind of talk about that. I guess if you have questions about when we scaled it and how we scaled it and where the budget went and things like that. And then everything that we're talking about in terms of results is based off a multi-touch model. So we're looking at first and last touch. So when you're keeping in mind, like, hey, well, how did you get those results and where did they come from? Like, just keep that in mind. So anything I'm missing, Jason, on that? Or
No, it's a perfect foundation. We're good to go.
yeah, sweet. So I think we want to just like highlight a couple things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff to highlight, but we kind of broke this up in a couple of areas. So the idea is like, audit, what do we find? What do we ultimately do with that? And then talk about targeting, audience, message, content, down to the strategy, and then how we measure results. So that's kind of be the whole format of this thing, just so you guys see the breakdown from, pretty much every step of the way. But the big thing is, and I think you guys, if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, they've probably seen this post before because I posted, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks ago. But we did an analysis early on, and we really wanted to understand because they at one point were spending a ton of money on gated lead gen assets, just gated content of any kind to marketers, and it converted really, really well. And the CPLs were insanely low. We're talking, I mean, down as low as $15 a lead, as much as like up to 100. So, I mean, for industry standard, I mean, for a content download, that's pretty good. But we all just wanted to make sure that we were allocating the budget in the right areas. And so the takeaway from here is pretty short and simple. Is after looking at all the leads, this is over a 12-month period in 2022, 1,886 86 leads. out of those, only 0.43 actually converted into opportunities. And so as soon as we kind of brought that up to them, and this again is looking at first and last touch, so any point in the journey, and giving these people a whole lot of time to convert, because content downloads, as we all know in this call, are, or if you don't, they're low intent, they're engagement points, but they're not necessarily hand raisers saying I'm ready to talk to sales. It's not that gated content's dead or bad, but we need to go in with the right expectations and understand, is this the best use of our money? And so this was one of the discoveries we had with them specifically on this piece, which ultimately led to, us kind of taking a look at the budget split between the two, looking at LinkedIn and Google Ads and noticing that, wait a minute, really all the budget's really dedicated into doing lead gen with top of funnel content on both Google and LinkedIn. And so there really wasn't a whole budget to facilitate product marketing, talking about what the company does, how it works, social proof, things of that nature. So I'll stop myself there for a second. See if Jason, you want anything, but
Yeah, just the definitions are probably important, a little bit of tofu and bofu for us, because I think everybody has a little bit of a different take on that. But for us, top of funnel is kind of educational content, right? It's going to be the playbook, it's going to be the guide, it's going to be something that has tangible value. And what we try to do, and I think all you guys would agree, is to move away from the idea of masking sales collateral as a form of educational content, which is a huge thing I always kind of pivot on, because it happens all the time. You've got a case study masked as something educational when it's really just a sales tactic kind of in disguise. And so like we define tofu as really valuable, educational, hit the ground running kind of content you can take away today without necessarily doing business with the company. And then the bottom of the funnel, like Jonathan said, it's product marketing, it's social proof. It's going to be a variation of things. It's going to build trust over time. But interestingly enough, just very, very heavily reliant as we jumped into this client on that top of funnel piece.
Exactly. And again, it's not to say that there's not some value in that. And you could also say, well, wait a minute, but I don't know, did their email nurture suck? And what did they do with those, emails after that? And, you could go into 1,000 different directions, right? And so those are all possibilities, right? That maybe led to the result that we just shared. But, we're just looking at the data as we can from our side and just providing that back to the client to say, hey, here's what we see. And, we give them the best recommendation possible, and ultimately they make the decision on it. So that was kind of the story there. But ultimately what we did is, and we didn't do this quite so drastically, but the idea was, all right, well, cool. So now we know that a lot of that money that's being spent on a couple of these core content pieces that were running over the course of all of 2022, we said, well, why don't we actually, and even to back up, one of the core things they said to us subjectively was, hey, we have a brand awareness problem. People don't know what we do. They don't know what our product is. And, we're having this whole problem, right? They kept hearing it from sales reps and through just like the market and social networks and whatnot. So, that actually, kind of was easy fuel for the fire, right? To say, okay, great. Now we can say, it's pretty easy to say, great. Not only the data says that we probably should be spending more money on brand awareness, talking more about the product, how it works and other things like that, but they're also hearing it from the market. So that's exactly what we did is, not quite this drastically in terms of 60-40 split so rapidly, but we started moving a lot more of that budget into product marketing ads, making sure there was a solid retargeting layer that had actual social proof, which at the time they didn't even have a retargeting layer set up. It was purely cold lead gen gated. And so that's another important thing to keep in mind too, where they're missing out on all the traffic that was hitting getting their website, and none of it's getting retargeted in the warm layer, which is a huge thing, which is where usually you see the majority of your conversions on paid social anyway. So that was kind of a big thing here. And then I think we kind of said it on the last slide to a degree, or alluded to it at minimum, but Google Ads, a lot of the keywords were leading to content pages for predominantly low intent keywords, but even there were some instances where they had the high intent versions of those keywords leading to content pages. And so, not the best experience, right? If I'm looking for XYZ type of software, I don't really want to read an ebook or a guide. I just want to understand what it is and what it does and who works and stuff like that, right? So the goal was to say, all right, well, let's immediately start allocating a lot more budget towards more high intent keywords where there was volume. And it didn't work in all cases. I think sometimes on LinkedIn, we always talk about high intent. Anyone who's read, over the last couple of years, I think there's been a big push by everyone around doing that, but sometimes there's not enough volume on a given keyword to actually put a modifier like platform tool, et cetera, at the end of it. So there are some instances where we've got to still run a low intent version and obviously still capture that high intent search if it happens with phrase. So I'll kind of end there and see if I miss anything, Jason, but that's kind of a little bit of how we initially started shifting the budget and setting expectations with the whole problem of brand awareness and people not knowing what the product was. So
Yeah, the brand problem is interesting because, we always say internally, I think a good methodology is solve for two questions, why insert company name and then why product, and not in that order. It's really why product. So solve the problems from a perspective of, okay, we've identified that there's a problem with said segment of the industry, right? The product category can solve that thing, whatever that problem is. But okay, now it's the next question. If you've kind of answered that, why insert brand name? Because then you're in the competitive space. And those two things are kind of things that we leverage from a balancing act, if you will, to make sure that the brand's kind of taken care of. So that's another thing that we tried to accomplish here with these guys.
right. And it's important to note too, we kind of, I suppose, ran out a little bit of time and possibly also forgot, but there's some other channels that were in this mix too. I mean, they're running Bing, YouTube, and display retargeting is 3 of their channels now. And I think, when making this, we wanted to give kind of a realistic idea of during the period of time we were looking at some of this data, what were the, channels that we started with. So most of the budget was going into these, but just to say that out loud, those are the other 3 channels that are running. And even now Facebook retargeting is another one that's in the mix, which was just recently launched actually a couple of weeks ago. And so the idea there, again, same thing with LinkedIn retargeting, is to say, hey, now we've got another channel of which people spend time. We're going to make sure we're covering them up on those channels too. So I guess know that, but these are the kind of the core channels. That's why I put them there. But the next thing is obviously the core thing. I mean, easy stuff, right? We all get it. You got to set goals. And so, the measure of success is always important. For us, it was marketing source opportunities that are qualified past stage 3. What's stage 3? It was just stage 3 within their deal pipeline. And that was, I believe, a probability of greater than 35% or something like that is how they define it. I have to go back and ask them, but around that, so that we actually knew there was a higher probability chance of it closing. So that's the thing that we were looking at in all of the reports. And they used HubSpot as their backend CRM. So all the data was stored in there. We had dashboards set up so we could understand all of those lagging indicators, in addition to all the stuff happening in the ad channel. And so really after we set the initial goals, right, which was them providing these, which there's a funny thing that maybe you'll notice it just looking at it that makes a little bit of no sense in this, but I'll comment on that in a second. But we really focused on 2 things. And one was like, we clearly need to have the number of leads we need to be establishing or hitting per month, but we also need to make sure that we're understanding what those actually going to turn into from a marketing source perspective. And so you'll notice that the leads are going up month over month, but the marketing source dots are staying the same. You might wonder, like, well, what the heck's that about? And you guys just told us that the whole plan was to move budget away from lead gen. And so the reality was at the time when we were doing this, and these dates are actually for the prior year, when we were doing this, they were basing it off of prior data in the past, historical data. And so, before they needed a lot more leads to actually hit their marketing source stop goal. And so now, once we started switching budget, we actually saw leads, of course, started to fall off because we were pulling budget away from some of those gated content downloads and other things like that, where leads were certainly cheap, but they weren't turning necessarily into opportunities, even in a long time frame. So important point to mention there on just the general goals. And I think this is probably a good slide maybe for you to talk about, Jason, actually a little bit, since we're all together.
Yeah, sure. So HubSpot being the CRM, you can do this in multiple CRMs. You guys know this all too well, but first touch, last touch kind of equates to a HubSpot perspective of original source and latest source for all intents and purposes. So what we like to do is employ a multi-touch model that's just taking into account those 2 things. So oftentimes we find that people who are too latched onto last touch or first touch just kind of miss a lot of the journey. And you can uncover that from a good GA, lift up the hood of GA and take a look at the paths to understand how that kind of affects things. Now, of course, sales cycle, ACVs, all those come into play whenever you're trying to trace the number of paths that are typically going to be in the journey. However, it's important for a brand like what we were discussing today for us to take a look at that. So combination, like you see at the bottom, of making sure that you're painting a nice picture. You got a direct, organic, and a paid social session that came from the entire journey prior to turning into a lead and any chance at revenue or pipeline. And had we relied on a first touch model, we clearly would have missed out on that. Had we relied on a last touch model, we clearly would have missed that as well. Very basic fundamental talk on attribution, but important because all too often it's not accounted for.
Exactly. That's why it's so important. The other thing too is that as much as we all love to talk about the holy grail of self-reported attribution has now saved us from all the problems of click-based attribution. They did implement that during I think it was during the end of last year or so. And so once that was established, then we were incorporating that into the workflow as well. So now we had some level of understanding, okay, for the things that maybe for our campaigns that are not necessarily a direct response, where we're trying to go after a cold audience and convert them immediately. That's not the goal. We're here to provide them some educational material, whether it be in the form of product marketing or whether it be in the form of actual content piece, get them back to the website and actually consume it. The goal is to really understand, okay, well, are they mentioning things like LinkedIn and Facebook and other channels, or are they not? And the answer was they were in many cases. And so, as commonly as we all probably seen on LinkedIn or other, if you haven't, then you will, because when you go into your HubSpot and you establish that, many times you'll see that there's a disalignment. You'll see, wait a minute, or misalignment. And you see that, wait a minute, why is original source say X or latest source say X, but how did you hear about us as X? And so there's always going to be those things that kind of come up, but they're still important for directional data so we understand kind of what's working and what's not.
And probably important to touch on just briefly is that workflow word. So we always go into every client that we work with and we build a workflow. It's pretty complex that'll take into account various attributes of the drill downs in HubSpot, for example, if it's a HubSpot client. And we just map it all to different ad channels. And so after we plug that guy in and let it go against the contacts in HubSpot, we have an output of some really good data, kind of a multi-touch model, if you will, from the back end of HubSpot. But always important to kind of get that going from day one versus having to scrub your data and then make new reports ad hoc, if you will, trying to chase multi-touch attribution.
Yeah, and it'll never be perfect. We all know
Never.
that attribution is not perfect. We all bat our heads against the wall. We wish it was, and there's obviously always going to be some things that we just have to. There's a little bit of gut and understanding the channel, and the audience, and all sorts of things that go into that. But it doesn't mean we just forget about measurement. We still measure what we can, and then pull in other things as needed. So. So then in terms of like audience breakdown, this is really easy. This is kind of a repeat of what we said already, and I want to leave some time for questions if there are any. But really simple from the get-go is really just breaking it down by region and enterprise and mid-market. So Google Ads, LinkedIn, and all channels represent that segmentation because there were different budget splits for mid-market and enterprise. Enterprise was, I believe, around 30%, mid-market was 70%. That was based predominantly on historical based information, their CRM, because historically they had gone after the mid-market and had success with it. There's a lot of social proof, et cetera, but they wanted to get more into the enterprise. So that's how they decided to adjust budget there. And then the US, UK, I forget the exact split. It might've been 60-40 to the UK and then 40 to the US because they're a UK-based company. So that's kind of how we initially split the campaigns. There were definitely plenty of other things we did in terms of objectives, but I'm not going to bore you guys with all the like in the channel weeds things, unless of course you're interested. But that's kind of how we broke it down because it's important just to make sure we've got some level of budget control around whatever the client's looking to do and whatever the strategic plan is for them. And so that really rolls into this. And so, as much as I'd love to take credit for, providing this all back to them, this was 100% us kind of feeding them a framework for how to think through this and them feeding us the data back. And so we basically got a Google Doc, nothing fancy at all. And they said, okay, here's the narrative of what we're trying to go after here. And all we want to do is communicate 3 messages. 3 messages is all we want to do. There are these messages, so on and so forth. And then we said, okay, great. All right, do we have content to back up any of those messages? And content in this instance could mean product marketing. It could also mean blog guides, templates, other assets like that. So really it was kind of a goal or a goal of saying, all right, great, well, let's organize the content under each of these messages so we actually understand what we want to promote. And so then we started testing between those 3 core messages across different headline variations, but never straying from the actual message itself, which I feel like, Jason, I'm sure you would agree. I mean, this commonly happens all the time where people just kind of want either your in-house team or your agency or whoever is managing or paid just to kind of see what works. Go have some fun, go throw up some ads and tell me what works and get back to me. And, that's a recipe for disaster because especially in B2B, when you've got a considered purchase, as we all probably know on this call, no one's coming in, after a couple of ads and saying, yippee, let's go. I'd like to buy a $15,000 product. And so the consistency around staying with the narrative and the core message is important so that, people have some familiarity with it. So over months of time, they remember you for 1 or 2 things. And that's the goal. So.
100%. I mean, I think people, myself included at times, can get test happy. And I think that it's all too often a problem with marketing in general, because to your point earlier, if you're testing 3 messages, let's go do a message test. This is going to be great. We're going to go find the perfect message. Okay, great. Well, unless you silo those messages into frameworks that follow a theme, you're going to come out the other side knowing a little bit about a bunch of random messages that you can't do anything about in the future. So unless you kind of line things up on a theme, you can't say, wow, message 1 just blew it out of the park. Let's go do more of that. Well, what is more of that unless you had a direction to begin with? And so I think it's super important to kind of frame that up, because again, people throw around, let's go do a message test all the time, or an ad test, where there's nothing consistently testing in order to say, double down on that, right?
Yeah, 100%. The other thing too is what was interesting too, I mean, you may have like multiple versions, and maybe some of you have this and more sophisticated. Actually, when we did the podcast with Pearl over at Mixpanel, she actually has a really cool visualization that actually looks a little bit more technical and fancy than this. With, I think it was, it goes kind of the same, like narrative, theme, programs, content, channels, I think, or something like that. So just a little bit deeper. But the point is like you may have multiples of these, right? So in the case of this client, we didn't have, we just had literally one set of messages for all groups of audiences. But you may have a case if the company, if one of the company you work with or you're consulting with has messaging that's very specific to the given persona and or mid-market versus enterprise, et cetera. Those might be some variations. Then you'd have a whole nother list of core messages you want to communicate to that market. And usually that theme, I mean, in this case with them, it lasted for about a quarter. And so every quarter we'd stay consistent with that theme, and then it would slightly change based on data we got back. And so some messages would come back that got a lot more engagement and or conversions off of them. And so we said, okay, great, maybe we should do a little bit more of that. And we made some slight iterations to the message. So just to add that point on. But I guess what it actually looked like once we actually implemented everything, and this is again, just kind of a general framework of how we position stuff. This isn't exactly how it looked at every given time because we were moving some things around. But the short story is we have, cold, warm layer. And so for anyone that has a little bit of paid experience, this is a no-brainer, you get it. For anyone that doesn't, cold is obviously anyone that hasn't been to your website or engaged with your advertising in a period of time. And then retargeting would be the people that have. And so you've got different splits you can create and all sorts of things. But the goal that we wanted to establish with them and the cold layer was making sure that we solve the brand awareness problem. And so there was the budget split of 60-40, like we talked about, focusing primarily value props, before and after ads, and pain points, and all again lined up with the core 3 messages that we just talked about before. And so there was that layer, and there were a handful of campaigns on that, split by geo. And then the content side of it was a lot of the content that honestly historically continued to perform last year. We still continue to run it because the conversion rate was great, and all of the leads fit the ICP. So the idea was just to continue running it, but just as a lower budget. And so that's kind of what the top layer looked like. And the split, as you can see on the left-hand side, it varied before. I think we may have started out 70-30 in the beginning because the retargeting audience was still pretty small. So we spent a little bit more bucks on the front end on the top to drive some more people into the funnel. But then we ultimately switched that because we needed to get frequency up in the retargeting layer based upon the people that were now coming down into that layer, and then basically broke it down into 3 different segments: 30-day, 90, and a 180-day. And the idea was that the 30-day people essentially are going to be the warmer people that have at least been to your website recently or engaged with one of your ads. And so we might have a slightly harder CTA to get them in a demo, as well as also building some credibility and trust in the bottom layer with testimonials and, third-party validation. And then obviously now you're 3 months out. If you haven't really engaged, then we need to kind of remind them again, what is it that they do? Because I forgot. I don't know. How many people remember a handful of ads they saw 3 months ago? Like, not many people. So we want to remind them again, and we use a lot of the same types of ads that we use in the cold layer, but now we can do that at a frequency that's higher against a smaller audience. And so that helps us ensure that we stay in front of that audience across whatever channel it may be, like LinkedIn, Facebook, et cetera, like we just mentioned. And then obviously if it bullets down into 180 days, now you're 6 months out. At this point, we've kind of lost them. We shouldn't be asking for a demo at this point. We should just be trying to provide them some content again, get them back engaged with the brand, et cetera. And again, these are just kind of some framework principles. No one moves through a linear funnel. It's not 1, 2, 3 step. It's just try to do our best job to, position the right type of content based upon the last time they engaged. So I'll stop myself there unless I miss anything, Jason, on this slide here.
No, it's all good. It's a great point. I mean, if I had a marker and I could just put a very large word at the top of this slide, it would say outcome-based messaging, right? Because trickling down through all of this, as you guys know all too well, is we always try to inform people that I don't care if it's content, or product marketing, or before and afters, or value props, or anything in between. It's got to speak from the user's perspective, and it has to be an outcome-based message, right? So even if you've got a really great piece of educational content that may focus on something more, I don't know, specific, that's not going to drive home necessarily an outcome per se until you read it, get the value out of it and try to surface it. I mean, that's just huge for all of our brands, and especially this one.
Right. The last thing I forgot to mention about this too is like it all looks very fancy in the retargeting layer, but we actually didn't do that at the get-go because the audiences were just too small. We couldn't break it out this many times. And so that's something to keep in mind with any channel, because there's going to be audience limitations, like LinkedIn's 300, for example. So we just got to keep that in mind. So you may not be able to do this depending on how big your retargeting audience is, but if it is, then it may be worth a try, because we saw, I don't know the percent off the top of my head, I'd have to ask one of our demand gen managers, but I know that there was an increase in conversions in the retargeting layer after we implemented this, especially within the 30-day layer where people were most engaged. And so, so we have seen that it works. And so, but again, you got to have the audience to be able to support it. So,
and I'd also add that don't be scared of frequency. We oftentimes see in the retargeting layer specifically that a really high, almost uncomfortable frequency will pan out as long as you keep watch of your numbers. A lot of people have a lot of different ideas about frequency and what it should be. One guy will say 6, one guy will say 12. Gartner will say something else, or a new report will come out, and just everyone changes their methodology. I think it's unique to every company. You should definitely test.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Yeah, we usually aim for anywhere from like 8 to 12 in the retargeting layer, 2 to 4 in the cold. But sometimes there's budget limitations on that. Sometimes depending on how active the audience is, there's all sorts of caveats to it, but there's just some general benchmarks. But yeah, to chat kind of through paid search, I guess, at a high level. So we've kind of talked about at least a little bit of the paid social side. So paid search is predominantly, the big thing was, as you guys remember, is everything was focused on top of funnel, predominantly sending to content pages, not bottom of the funnel, like demo-based pages, et cetera. And most of the keywords were not high intent. A lot of them were low intent. And so the goal is really to say, all right, well, we need to get more of the budget in there because we want to ultimately meet some of these initial short-term goals, which is always important to keep in mind, the short-term and the long-term, as we all know. And so we focus most of the budget on high intent keywords, anything that platform, tool, software, et cetera, maker, creator, other things like that. And so, so we built a whole new set of campaigns, again, split by geo based upon their budget allocation, allocated. And these budget allocations, that's what you see at the top, is how much of the overall paid search budget was allocated in each campaign. And then each of the campaigns, obviously, is the number that we ran. But this wasn't the case all the time. I mean, I think it was actually a little bit more extreme in the beginning. Around 90% of the budget was going to high intent. And so, so obviously this kind of moves and shakes as performance changes, but at any rate, this kind of gives you an idea of like where they started and where they are today, where most of the money's going. And, where I mentioned before, why is low intent still there? Now it's because there's still some level of keywords that just don't have the volume that are really required to get enough data into Google Ads to actually bid on high intent modifiers. So the idea is really to continue to stay in front of it because they are still very relevant keywords, and to just send them to pages that still are educational, right? Where they can still get some knowledge and understand better about what the product is or whatever the search is related to, and go from there. And so that was a big piece of it. And then there was retargeting, and then obviously brand campaigns were the other two. So we had an RLSA campaign, and for any that don't know what that is, it's just retargeting in Google Ads. And so if someone goes to your website, come back to Google, they search for a keyword of what you're bidding on, then you can obviously serve an ad to them. And typically what we'll do is put bid modifiers on that to obviously win the bid against anyone else, because these are people that are more engaged, they're warmer. So ideally we want to win that business, win that bid rather. And so, so that's what RLSA ads look like. And obviously brand is brand. Everyone knows what brand is. So don't need to tell anyone that. And the only reason we spent on brand really, because no one likes to pay the Google tax, is just because they had heavy competition on their brand terms. I mean, immense competition, 2-3 competitors at any given time going after them. And so for them, it was extremely important to show up first. And so to do that required paying Google. So, brands started out with a smaller budget, but has increased over time because there's just an immense competition in the category that they operate in. So.
Only thing I'd add there is I know it says retargeting high intent under or above the RLSA section, but I think that I'm not sure about this client specifically, but something we often see is that you can get a little bit looser and go a little bit more low intent with RLSA, which is important to test because remember, you're bidding on people who have already become warm. And so if you're a little bit more low intent there, they already have raised their hand to a degree by being in the retargeting list to begin with. And so you're kind of qualifying them in a different way. And so you can be a little bit more flexible if you wanted to get your RLSA list up in count and experience some really good retargeting.
Exactly. I realize we're 35 minutes in, so I guess we're ranting a lot over here. So here's kind of just a general framework, a starting point. This is a simplified version. Our actual internal SOPs are a little bit more expanded out of what you see here, but this kind of gives you an idea of how to create great text ads. Clearly, you can get all sorts of creative. I mean, this isn't the creative side of it. It's more just the framework and the positioning of how the text ads are put together. So you can see non-brand, competitor, brand, etc. And so, really the goal is usually what we're doing is having at minimum 2 RSAs, in some cases 1, but usually 2 RSAs where we're testing company first to have a brand awareness element to it, because when someone searches for XYZ software, we also want to make sure that the brand is next to that keyword to create some level of brand awareness. And so a lot of times we'll see those RSAs perform a lot better when that's pinned as headline 1. Versus just having the keyword, which I think is a lot of what everyone would usually go to, right? I type in a keyword, I'm looking for the keyword, which again, it's gone kind of both ways depending on the client, but ideally we've got both those running so we get some data back and understand what's working and what's not. And then competitor ads, kind of same general thing in terms of different variations. Those are just 4. There's a whole variety of different things that we've experimented around with competitor ads. And then obviously the core thing with competitor ads as it relates to non-brand is making sure that we narrow down some of the outcomes or the value props of what you get with the differentiating factor. And so some companies will know this better than others. They knew it very well. And so they gave us a very specific set of things. We're like, these are literally the 4 things that make us different, and that's it. And so we made sure that those text ads were very focused on that so that there was no confusion about why XYZ company. And so I think that's pretty much kind of the context of it, unless Jason, you want to add anything to that? But
no, I'd add one little thing. It's just a balancing act between algorithmic proficiency and writing something from a really creative perspective. Because Google's algorithms changing, we know that all too well. I've been in search forever, and I remember back in the day where we didn't have any algorithmic help, and so you had to really write something very, very creative and very testable. But nowadays it's about a balancing act, and I think it's going to go in that direction more and more. So don't necessarily lock everything down, give it enough to test and iterate on, and then keep that creative control within your copy. So.
Exactly. Yeah. It gets into the weeds, but I mean, sometimes you could do pin headline 1 with other headlines rotating, or you could even have 5 headlines pinned as one headline 1, another 5 pin headline 2, so on and so forth. So then you get a little more control around your text ad. So if you're trying to communicate something very specific, you don't let Google go too crazy, but if you are going to let Google, to Jason's point, start optimizing, then it's really important to think about what follows after that keyword, because sometimes you get these weird situations where it's like, what the hell are they saying? Like they got the same word that's popping up on both headline 1 and 2, and it's just because someone didn't really think through, like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, it doesn't really make sense, when Google's going to rotate all these things around. So a little detail there, but basically to kind of end on, I think this is kind of the second to last slide, and then we can kind of call it because I think we're basically at time. I didn't think this was going to take as long, but clearly I'm more chatty than I thought, but or we are. So big takeaway here is like not every campaign is measured the same way, and we aligned on that with them in the beginning. And so it was very key that when we launched product marketing campaigns targeting a cold audience, we will not get conversions. The point is not to convert. We're not looking at CPL, and no one's panicking over a week and monthly basis. And so we aligned on that from the get-go. The whole point was really to look at engagement from the ads, what they were doing on the site after they got there, so on and so forth. And so some of the metrics more towards the left-hand side is really what we focused on. And then clearly, over time, we were looking not only at attributable based things coming out from various different channels, but also overall in the inbound funnel, are we driving more opportunities, more marketing sourced ops past deal stage 3? And so that's what we reported up every single month and worked with the team on that. And, again, like I said earlier with the attribution stuff, it was not perfect, right? And I think one thing we always don't want to do is necessarily take credit for something that we didn't actually do. But we all know that the buyer journey is not linear. There's all sorts of touches. Some are attributable, some are not. And so at the end of the day, they just said, honestly, we want to know generally what's going on in paid, but we just want to make sure we hit this number per month, period. And so, so that was generally the goal with metrics around that. And really that kind of wraps up into the overall results of it. And I think the only reason I wanted to share this is, well, one, I guess, so it's believable and it's not just a bunch of BS on another spreadsheet with theoretical frameworks, but to know that like there was some real data behind this. And so, what you can see is that on September 2022, we shifted more of the budget away from lead gen, not turning it off, by the way, but away from lead gen. You really didn't see much difference, honestly, for the first few months. No difference. And we honestly expected that to a degree. It kind of depends on the client. Sometimes it's a little bit different, but you really started to see kind of a pickup once we got past into the new year. And so there could be a little bit of seasonality to that to a degree as well. But when we looked back at data even before that, you can kind of see, even looking back at March, I didn't pull in full Q1 data, but there were nowhere near 87 ops. And so so that's kind of what you're looking at here is total amount of ops coming from paid via the multi-touch attribution model that Jason was talking about. And I know the whole headline is 170% increase, but when I reran the numbers, the data has moved on me a little bit, luckily in the right area. So it's actually 180 now looking at March 2022 to March 2023. So anyway, so we'll keep iterating and it'd be great to see them continue to grow in the same fashion. So unless I'm missing anything, Jason, you wanted to add to this one, I think that's kind of a good cap.
I think it's a great cap. We'll check the data again in, a couple of weeks and we'll be at 210%. It'll be fantastic.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. 100%. So, well, Brian, maybe I'll let you jump in. I know we were supposed to hold to 45, so I guess I've left an amazing amount of time for us of 3 minutes, unless we wanted to go a little over, which we can if we want. So
Yeah. So
this
that
was
first. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just saying, yeah, hopefully this was helpful to some people and got some value out of it.
Yeah, first off, thanks guys for giving that presentation. That was really excellent. I especially love the text structure slide. I think that was incredibly helpful. Does anyone currently have any questions? Ben, Scott, is Jessica still on? Any of you guys have any questions?
No questions. Just great job sharing, but I'll shut up and let Ben ask his.
No, that's all right. My question is like speed to results, like over multiple projects like this. Like, so I've done 2 projects similar to this, and I saw a similar curve on a similar timeline. It starts picking up around month 6, and by month 7 or 8, if it's working in a big way or not. And I'm wondering if that's typical for you guys. I'm a little bit newer to paid channels. I don't know if you guys could talk about that and maybe factors that slow it down or speed it up.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to look at all of our clients, but I mean, just, knowing all the different folks we've worked with, I mean, generally speaking, I don't know about quite 6 months, but certainly 3 months and beyond is generally when we start to see a pickup on opportunities. But it all depends too on is this an enterprise motion? What's the ACV? We've got some clients that are, 150, 200 going after Coca-Cola, and brands like that. So clearly you've got kind of a different motion there. These guys had a mix of mid-market. So there were still, a lot of smaller companies that, are moving at a slightly faster sales cycle. So I think those are some things to kind of take into consideration too. But yeah, I mean, I'd say like on the whole, I mean, generally a 3 to 6 months time frame. That's usually what we'll try to prep them for too, which, I mean, no one knows. I mean, Jason or I, or none of us on this call have the magic crystal ball, right? We wish we did. It'd be great if I could just say, yep, in 6 months, you're going to see all the ops come in. Just hang tight, But yeah, in general, to answer your question, unless Jason, you've got another tidbit, but yeah, I mean,
No.
3 to 6 months. Generally.
I'd say the same thing. Big ACVs, clearly it's going to be longer. We've got a couple of PLG clients that are just rocking right now. I mean, we're talking about just clocking it from a lead gen perspective that's supported by demand gen. So I guess the more transactional the item gets or the product or the service gets, clearly those are going to shorten the cycle.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's always things to there's always things to consider, and it's certainly tough too when you've got that period of time, because I mean that's a long time for most people, anywhere from like Series A to Series C to say, yeah, we're waiting, right? So that's why I think, it's not like lead gen's dead, like everyone loves to say on LinkedIn. I mean, people are still going after bottom of the funnel, high intent keywords. And so we always got to keep in mind like the short term and the long term. And so, for them, it was that's why there was a heavy emphasis on getting Google Ads performant in the beginning, because we still wanted to capture some of the existing demand already out there and not just spend all our money on demand gen create awareness campaigns. And so anyway, it's always a balance, as anything is.
And
So,
really, depending on the time to ramp, if you want to call it that, it's about what you measure when you're ramping, if you're in the absence of the KPIs that you're ultimately looking for, right? So if
yeah.
you're going after Coca-Cola and it's going to be, $100 million companies plus, don't expect a lot of demos. What are we here to measure? Okay, the penetration into the target account list is 1, and other factors as far as engagement by persona is 2, and a whole host of things. And so it's like,
Exactly. Yeah,
as you're
exactly.
waiting, don't just sit back and twiddle your thumbs and say, okay, we'll get the leads in 6 months. Nope, we have to focus on other things during that time.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, if you don't, I mean, especially the enterprise companies, I mean, as much as we don't, an influenced revenue and influence pipeline is not really that fun and sexy, and no one really wants to stand behind influenced. They'd rather say I sourced it and it came in inbound from me, from my efforts. But
Yeah.
the enterprise guys, it's just there's some that are just not going to come inbound as much as we'd like them to. And so that's why you need, whether it be impression data from LinkedIn, de-anonymization on your website and things like that, to just unearth some at least initial data points, because otherwise you'll just be dead in the water with paid. I mean, people are going to turn it off because
Mhm.
everyone's going to have the expectation like, where are the freaking leads, man? And why are none of them converting right now? And so that, and also considering the fact that there's a benefit too on the outside, which we've seen for a lot of clients, after 3 to 6 months of running paid, they'll see outbound email conversion rates increase. And so one client that we worked with, Drata, actually saw that, and we did that with them. And it was a really cool thing that they provide us a whole bunch of data on it. And so, you got to consider that too, which that's like not coming in inbound, right? Wait, shit, it's cold and sales are taking credit for it, but but you can still see that there's some correlation to the effort. So
Because ultimately, you guys know we say this all the time on LinkedIn and other places, but sales and marketing have to talk and they have to help each other out, right? So the whole idea is air
always.
cover for those guys in the interim. They're going after big deals too, so they need help from marketing. We need help from them because they need to be going after the same target account list we're going after to warm up each other's audiences, if you will.
Yeah.
And so if you can align around that and get on the same page and set the expectations, it can be a home run. It can be at least a really good journey, a lot more beneficial and a lot more rewarding than not having the proper expectations and unrealistically measuring things. Everybody's been there. That's tough.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Such a great call out with the sales alignment. So I know so many marketers who don't take the time to really spend the one-on-one time with members of the sales team, especially when you guys are the ones driving these inbound leads. If there's not a tight process for that handoff, like so much of that effort goes to waste. Like if there's not alignment on what's considered a viable opportunity, if there's not alignment on, you mentioned, Jason, you mentioned reply rates from outbound, messaging. Huge proponent of that, but also going through their messaging to make sure that the messaging between marketing and sales is totally integrated, to making sure that we're all echoing the same value propositions. And like you guys said, outcomes, right? Making sure it's relevant in the taxonomy of prospects.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, there should literally be no excuse. It always drives me nuts because I mean, every sales team, I mean, I was in sales before I was in marketing, and we always had a target account list. I mean, there's always some list that exists. I wasn't just aimlessly walking around going after accounts and stuff like that. So, the point is like, if marketing from a paid perspective, especially, does not have a target account list of the same exact accounts that sales is going after, I mean, shame on them. I mean, there's no excuses, minus, I guess, if the sales team for some reason just is not getting back, but I don't know. These things just should be easy, right? There's a spreadsheet, it's in HubSpot, it's in Salesforce, wherever it is. We got to get that data in, and at minimum make sure that, those accounts are not just from an air cover perspective, because obviously we'd ideally want to source some of those in and help out sales. But, at the same time, back to the outbound email point, we also want them to have familiarity. And so if you know the psychological bias, familiarity bias, right? more times we see a brand or see a person who works at that brand, the more likely we're going to be to respond to an email or other type of outreach. This is exactly why this stuff works. So, but anyway, yeah, it's something that still we've got a handful of clients that still haven't given us that, and it's like, come on, guys.
Well, it's a target account list also. It's not a TAM list.
Right. Yeah.
Really important. And
Yeah.
because, sometimes it'll happen. Oh, here's our target account list. It's half the world. And yeah, so let's go after those guys. No.
Yeah.
Who's sales going after today? Target accounts. And
We've
then
got $10,000. We'd like to target the globe, and yeah, we've got 100,000 accounts that we'd like to target, and go do it. Go have fun.
sure. Yeah.
So,
Just add a couple of zeros to the spend, we'll be down.
exactly. Yeah.
I hope this is helpful. I feel like I could talk on all of these topics for probably another 2.5 hours and just, jam like this, but
I think where we pull out a 6-pack of beer or a whiskey or
Yeah.
something like that, just continue on with some
Sure.
pizzas ordered, and keep going.
Yeah, you guys ever make it to San Diego, the beers are on me. All right.
Yeah.
fair enough.
I love it. It'd be fun.
Sweet. Well, thanks again, guys, for presenting today. We super appreciate it. I know the community is going to get a lot of value out of this. Are there any more questions before we close out today? Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks so much, everyone. And once again, Jonathan, Jason from Omni Lab. Feel free to reach out to them directly on LinkedIn or on their website. I'll be sure to post links when I upload the recording to the community. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thanks, Brian.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
See you on LinkedIn.